The room was filled with a low hum of chatter as I clutched the wine glass, my fingers trembling slightly. Ethan stood across from me, his dark eyes locked onto mine, a spark of something electric crackling between us. We raised our glasses, the clink echoing softly, drowning out the world around us. "To new beginnings," he said, a half smile playing on his lips. I could feel my heart race, the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. What was this tension? Why did it feel so right yet so wrong? As I took a sip, I felt exposed, as if he could see right through me. For years, I had felt invisible, lost in the routine of my marriage to David. The days blurred together, filled with mundane conversations and obligations. But here, in this moment with Ethan, I felt alive. I could hardly remember the last time someone looked at me like I mattered. My mind darted back to late nights spent in silence, sitting across from a man who barely noticed my presence. "You seem distant," Ethan said, his voice low, pulling me back from my thoughts. I bit my lip, contemplating whether to reveal my truth. "It's just, I feel alone sometimes," I confessed, the words slipping out before I could stop them. A wave of vulnerability washed over me, and I could see that my honesty caught him off guard. "Loneliness can be a heavy burden," he replied, his gaze softening. "I know it well." There was a moment of silence as we both sat with our feelings, the weight of our confessions hanging in the air like a thick fog. I could see the shadows of his unfulfilled dreams flickering in his eyes, mirroring my own struggles. Then, as if the universe had conspired to bring us closer, our hands brushed against each other. A jolt of electricity surged through me, igniting a complex mix of guilt and excitement. I quickly pulled my hand away, but the warmth lingered, a fleeting moment that felt like it could change everything. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. Did he feel it too? I started, but he interrupted me, his voice barely a whisper. "What if we stopped thinking about what we should do and just felt?" His words hung in the air, and I felt a pull towards him, a desire I hadn't felt in years. But guilt gnawed at my insides. How could I entertain such thoughts when my life was tangled with David's? I tried to shake the feeling off, but it clung to me like a shadow. "Clara," Ethan said, his tone serious, "you deserve to feel seen, to feel wanted." His words struck a chord deep within me. I had spent so long suppressing my own needs, putting my husband's desires before my own. In that moment, I wanted to scream out my frustrations, to let him know just how lost I really was. But instead, I simply nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. The question hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to burst. I wanted to answer, to confess everything, but fear held me back. What would I say? I wanted to feel alive, to be seen, to be more than just Clara, the wife. "Sometimes I just want to escape," I admitted, my voice trembling. "To find someone who understands." Ethan stepped closer, the distance between us closing like a tightrope. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. The sincerity in his voice made my heart flutter. In that charged moment, I realized that this was more than just a toast. It was a crossroads, a point where everything could shift. The tension and desire swirled around us, and I was left standing on the edge, wondering if I had the courage to take the leap. As I sat there in the dim light of the bar, my mind drifted back to a time when laughter filled my days. I could almost hear David's voice, warm and inviting, echoing in my thoughts. We were so in tune back then, sharing jokes and dreams, as if nothing could ever come between us. I remembered the way he would wrap his arms around me, pulling me close as we watched the sunset, our laughter dancing in the air. But now, that connection felt like a distant memory, faded and frayed at the edges. Clara, are you okay?" Ethan's voice broke through my reverie, pulling me back to the present. His eyes were steady on me, a concern etched on his face that made my heart flutter and ache at the same time. "I'm fine," I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, I was anything but fine. The truth was, my marriage had shifted from passion to something cold and indifferent. I felt like a ghost wandering through my own life, and every day felt heavier than the last. Ethan leaned in closer, his gaze searching mine. "You seem lost. It's like you're somewhere else." I sighed, the weight of my loneliness pressing down on me. "I guess I am," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, sometimes I feel invisible, like I'm just going through the motions." He nodded slowly, as if he understood. "I get that. I feel that way too sometimes, like no one really sees me." His words struck a chord within me. I was not alone in my feelings of isolation. We were both trapped in our own worlds, yearning for something more, something real. I wanted to reach out and bridge the gap between us, but the fear of crossing a line held me back. As we sat in silence, I caught myself watching him. There was something about the way his eyes lingered on me that sent a shiver down my spine. It was a mix of attraction and guilt, and I couldn't quite make sense of it. Should I feel this way about him? Was it wrong? "Ethan," I started, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my heart. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied, his expression open and inviting. "When was the last time you felt truly connected to someone?" I looked into his eyes, hoping to find an answer, not just for him, but for myself as well. He paused, considering my question. "Honestly, it's been a while. I miss it. I miss feeling alive." His confession hung in the air, heavy with unspoken desires. I felt a sudden urge to reach out to him, to bridge the gap between our loneliness. But at that moment, I was reminded of David, of the life I had built. How could I betray that? Just then, our hands brushed against each other on the table. It was a fleeting moment, but it ignited a spark between us, a jolt of electricity that made my heart race. I pulled my hand back, feeling a rush of heat flood my cheeks. "I'm sorry," I stammered, my voice shaking. "I didn't mean to." Ethan's eyes darkened with a mix of surprise and something else, something deeper. "It's okay, Clara. It happens." But it didn't feel okay. It felt wrong. I could already feel the weight of guilt settling in my chest. And yet, there was a part of me that craved more. The attraction was undeniable, and with each passing second, I wondered if this connection could fill the void I had felt for so long. As I looked at him, I realized that we were two souls adrift, searching for something we couldn't quite name. And in that moment of vulnerability, I felt a flicker of hope, despite the guilt that lingered in the background. "Maybe we should take it slow," I suggested, my heart pounding in my chest. "I don't want to complicate things." Ethan nodded, though his expression was still conflicted. "I understand, but it's hard to ignore what's happening between us, Clara." His words hung in the air, a silent agreement that we were both aware of the path we were treading. In that moment, I felt the weight of my choices looming over me. Would I dare to explore this connection, or would I retreat back into the safety of my mundane life? The evening air was heavy with tension as Ethan and I sat across from each other, a bottle of wine between us. I poured the ruby liquid into our glasses, my hands slightly trembling. It was as if the world around us faded away, leaving just the two of us in this moment. I could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air, thick enough to cut. "Cheers," Ethan said softly, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his, the sound echoing like a promise. We both took a sip, our eyes locking for an instant longer than necessary. I could see a flicker of something in his gaze, a longing that mirrored my own. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the wine spread through me. You know, I haven't felt this alive in a long time, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned in, his expression serious. You deserve to feel that way, Clara. We all do. His words wrapped around me, pulling me closer to him, and I couldn't help but feel a rush of exhilaration mixed with dread. What were we doing? As the night wore on, the conversation flowed easily, each shared story peeling back layers we had built around ourselves. I talked about my dreams and the life I had imagined before marriage, and he shared his own struggles, his voice laced with vulnerability. There was a time when I thought I would be an artist, he said, a hint of sadness in his eyes. But life just happened, you know? I nodded, understanding all too well. I remember feeling so full of dreams when I was younger. Now it feels like I'm just going through the motions. I paused, feeling a heaviness settle in my chest. I miss feeling truly connected to someone. His gaze softened, and in that moment, I felt an electric charge in the air between us. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. I could feel my heart racing, and when our hands brushed against each other while reaching for the wine, it was like a spark, igniting a fire within me. Clara, he said, his voice low and earnest. I don't want to complicate things for you, but before he could finish, I leaned in closer, my breath catching in my throat. What if we don't think about the complications for a moment? I whispered, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Ethan's eyes widened, and then, as if drawn together by an unseen force, we both moved closer. The distance between us vanished, and in that breathless moment, we kissed. It was electric, a rush of emotions that sent shivers down my spine. But as quickly as it began, a wave of guilt crashed over me. What had I done? The reality of my marriage hit me like a cold splash of water. I pulled away, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan, I know, he said, his voice thick with understanding. I didn't mean to push you. I shouldn't have kissed you. I have a family, I replied, my voice trembling. The weight of my choices settled heavily on my shoulders. The door swung open suddenly, and David stepped into the room. My heart dropped. He looked surprised to see us together, and I could feel the tension shift in an instant. What's going on here? He asked, his voice sharp. I felt a rush of panic. The once warm atmosphere turned cold, and I glanced at Ethan, whose expression mirrored my own fear. Nothing, I stammered, my mind racing. We were just talking. David's eyes narrowed, searching for a truth that I could not reveal. It looks like more than just talking. No, really, it wasn't, I insisted, feeling the weight of my guilt pressing down on me. I could see the hurt and confusion in David's eyes, and it twisted my heart. Ethan shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. I should go, he said quietly, standing up. Wait, I said, desperate. I didn't mean for this to happen. He looked at me, a mix of regret and longing in his gaze. Clara, you have to think about what this means for you. As he walked out the door, I felt a part of me go with him. I was left with David's questioning eyes and a whirlwind of emotions that threatened to unravel everything I had ever known. I felt trapped, caught in a web of desires and responsibilities that I didn't know how to navigate. What had I gotten myself into? The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a soft glow in my bedroom. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of last night. I felt trapped, caught between the rush of what had just happened with Ethan and the weight of my responsibilities to David. My heart was heavy, and I could feel the guilt gnawing at me. I rolled over, hoping for a moment of clarity, but instead, I was met with the familiar sight of David, still asleep beside me. His face was peaceful, and for a brief moment, I remembered the man I fell in love with. The man who used to make me laugh and feel cherished, but that felt like a lifetime ago. I whispered to myself, "What have I done?" as I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him. I needed air. I needed to think. I padded quietly to the kitchen, the cool tiles grounding me as I made a cup of coffee. The rich smell filled the space, but it did little to ease the turmoil inside me. With my hands wrapped around the warm mug, I stared out the window. The garden looked beautiful, but it felt like a facade, just like my marriage. I thought about Ethan and the way his gaze lingered on me, igniting a fire I hadn't felt in years. But that fire came with a price, and I was not sure I was willing to pay it. Suddenly, I heard David's voice call out from the bedroom, "Clara, where are you?" I quickly set the mug down and called back, "Just making coffee. I'll be right there." Panic surged through me. I didn't want to face him yet, especially after what happened. I took a deep breath, trying to center myself, and walked back to our room. David was sitting up, rubbing his eyes. "You're up early. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just couldn't sleep," I replied, forcing a smile. "Wanted to get a head start on the day." He smiled back, but I could see a hint of concern in his eyes. "You've been a bit off lately. Is something bothering you?" I felt a lump in my throat. How could I explain the chaos inside me? "Just tired, I guess. Work has been busy." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. "If there's something you want to talk about, I'm here." "Thanks, David," I said, biting my lip. He was trying, but the distance between us felt insurmountable. I wanted to reach out, to bridge that gap, but every time I thought of Ethan, the guilt twisted like a knife in my stomach. After breakfast, I found myself wandering to the living room, my mind still racing. I picked up my phone, scrolling through messages and photos, but everything felt empty. I couldn't shake the thought of Ethan's touch, the spark that ignited between us. Just then, my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. "Morning, Clara. Hope you're okay?" I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I felt a mix of excitement and dread. I needed to reply, but what do I say? I took a deep breath and typed back, "Morning. Just trying to sort things out." His response was almost immediate. "I understand. Just know I'm here if you need to talk." A part of me wanted to reach out, to confide in him about everything I was feeling, but another part screamed that this was wrong. I put the phone down, feeling the weight of my decisions pressing down on me. Later that day, as I was cleaning up after lunch, my thoughts drifted back to Ethan. I couldn't ignore the thrill that came with our connection, but at what cost? What if this led to something that unraveled my family? David walked in, breaking my thoughts. "Clara, are you okay? You seem distant." I turned to him, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just thinking." "About what?" he pressed, concern etched on his face. "Just life, I guess," I said, hoping to deflect the conversation. He came closer, placing his hand on my shoulder. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I care about you." Those words struck a chord in me. I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was drifting further away from him. I nodded, swallowing back my emotions. "Thanks, David. I just need some time to figure things out." As I looked into his eyes, I realized how much I had taken for granted. The bond we once had was still there, but it felt fragile, like a thread ready to snap. I needed to make a choice, but the thought of letting go of my connection with Ethan felt impossible. In that moment, I understood that while my feelings for Ethan were intoxicating, they posed a threat to everything I had built with David. The stakes were high, and I had to confront the reality of my choices. I was standing at a crossroads, and whichever path I chose could change everything. As I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of my thoughts pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. The room was dim, the curtains drawn tight, but my mind was wide open, racing with emotions I couldn't quite tame. I thought about Ethan, about the way he made me feel seen and alive in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Yet with every beat of my heart, guilt clawed at the edges of my mind, reminding me of the life I had built with David. "Clara, are you okay?" My phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was Ethan. His simple question sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to respond, to tell him how much I craved our moments together, but fear gripped me. I typed back a quick, "Yeah, just thinking," and hit send. I stared at the screen, waiting for his reply, my heart pounding in my chest. The bond with Ethan was growing deeper, filled with stolen glances and secret conversations that felt like lifelines in a sea of loneliness. We met in the park, sharing quiet moments where words often felt unnecessary. Just being near him filled a void I had forgotten existed. Each time our hands brushed, a spark ignited, leaving me breathless and a little terrified. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench, I dared to reveal some of my feelings. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in a fog," I admitted, looking down at my hands. "Like I'm just going through the motions. I miss feeling, well, alive." Ethan turned to me, his expression serious. "I get it, Clara. I really do. It's like we're stuck in a world that doesn't see us." His voice was soft, but the intensity of his gaze made my heart race. But then, just as I felt the warmth of connection, the guilt would seep back in. What about David? He was still my husband, even if our marriage felt like a distant memory. I had to confront this. I had to face the reality of my life. That evening, David came home earlier than usual. The atmosphere in the house shifted instantly, like a storm rolling in. I could feel the tension rising as he walked through the door, his face a mask of weariness. "Hey, Clara, how was your day?" he asked, dropping his bag on the floor. "Just the same," I replied, forcing a smile. But inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions. I had to talk to him. I needed to lay everything on the table, to let him see the cracks in our marriage that I had been ignoring for so long. "David, can we talk?" I finally blurted out, my heart racing. He looked surprised, glancing at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. "I feel like we've been drifting apart. I miss us. I miss the connection we had." His brow furrowed, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. "I thought everything was fine, Clara. We've just been busy, that's all." "No, it's not just that. I feel alone, like I'm living in a shadow. There's something missing between us." David opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. I could see it in his eyes. He was processing my words, and for the first time, I felt like I was breaking through the walls we had built around us. "I don't want to lose you, but I also can't ignore how I feel anymore. There's someone else." I hesitated, the weight of that admission hanging in the air. "I'm confused, David. I don't know what to do." His expression shifted from confusion to hurt, and I could feel the tension crackle between us. "Clara, please don't do this. We can work on things. I know we can." But could we? My heart ached at the thought of hurting him, yet I felt an undeniable pull toward Ethan. In that moment of vulnerability, I realized I had to make a choice. Do I pursue this connection with Ethan, risking everything I had built? Or do I recommit to my marriage, hoping to reignite the spark that seemed so far away? The stakes were high, and the path ahead was anything but clear. The days following my decision felt like walking through a thick fog. Each morning, I woke up to the same heavy weight in my chest. David was still here, moving through our home like a ghost, and the silence between us was deafening. It was as if we were both pretending not to see the cracks that had formed in our lives. One evening, after dinner, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the wall. David was in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV, but he might as well have been a million miles away. I heard the familiar sound of his voice, but the words didn't reach me. I was lost in my own thoughts, replaying the choices I had made. "Clara?" David's voice broke through the silence, pulling me back to reality. "Are you okay?" I hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I wanted to tell him everything, to lay bare the turmoil inside me, but the fear of his reaction held me back. "Yeah, I'm fine," I replied, forcing a smile that felt more like a mask. He looked at me for a moment, searching my face for truth. "You don't seem fine. You've been distant lately." I took a deep breath. "It's just been a lot, you know? Work, life, everything." He nodded, but I could see the concern etched on his face. "I'm here if you want to talk." I wanted to scream, to tell him about Ethan, about the feelings I had tried to bury. But instead, I just nodded. "Thanks, David." After our conversation, I felt a rush of guilt wash over me. How could I sit here pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't? I needed to confront the truth, not just for myself, but for David too. The next day, I made the decision to seek therapy. It was a step I had been avoiding, but I knew I needed help to understand the mess of emotions swirling inside me. I found a therapist who specialized in relationships, and as I sat in her warm, inviting office, I felt a flicker of hope. "Tell me what brought you here," she said, her voice soothing. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my secrets. "I've been feeling lost, like I don't know who I am anymore." She nodded, encouraging me to continue. "What makes you feel that way?" I took a deep breath. "I've been in a marriage that feels empty. I thought it was just a phase, but it's been years. And then I met someone else, Ethan." As I spoke, the words poured out of me like water from a dam. I told her about my connection with Ethan, the thrill of being seen and desired, and the overwhelming guilt that followed. I watched as her expression shifted from curiosity to understanding. "It sounds like you have been wrestling with some deep feelings of loneliness," she said gently, "and it's okay to acknowledge that." For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of relief. I was finally able to put into words what I had been feeling. The shame that had clung to me began to lift, just a little. In the weeks that followed, I continued to see my therapist. Each session peeled back layers of my heart, revealing truths I had shunned for too long. I realized how important it was to be honest with myself and with David. One day, as I sat in a cafe, sipping my coffee, I saw a couple laughing together. They looked so in love, so connected. It struck me how I missed that in my life. I longed for that kind of joy, not just fleeting moments, but a deep, abiding happiness. When I returned home, I sat down with David. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my heart. He looked up, concern flickering in his eyes. "What's wrong?" "It's about us. I think we need to be honest about where our marriage stands." David nodded slowly, and I felt the tension in the air shift. This was the beginning of something, I hoped. A chance to heal, to rebuild, or maybe even to let go. As I lay in bed that night, I contemplated my journey. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with uncertainty. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was ready to explore the complexities of my heart, to embrace the lessons life had to offer, and to understand that healing takes time. Share this story if you believe that honesty and vulnerability can pave the way to healing in relationships. Leave a comment about a time when you faced a difficult conversation that changed your life, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one.